Thank you. I'm very delighted to talk to you about the autobiography because I do like it very much, and I think it's a key text to understanding Trollope. Okay, Trollope's autobiography of a novelist. The first half of the diptych, which I take to be chapters 1 through 12. I begin with Trollope's description of his experience of the creative state he knew when conjuring up or writing down his novels, where he produced the best truth and highest spirit that I have been able to produce. At such times I have been able to imbue myself thoroughly with the characters I have had in hand. I have wandered alone among the rocks and woods, crying at their grief, laughing at their absurdities, and thoroughly enjoying their joy. I have been impregnated with my own creations, till it has been my only excitement to sit with the pen in my hand and drive my team before me, with as quick a pace before me as I could make them travel. Note the many mixed metaphors. There are many passages of this type in the second half of his diptych, chapters 12 through 20, and you may find the like in other pieces of his writing about the art of fiction and his experience of it. For example, A Walk in the Wood or The Panjandrum. Trollope had the unusual gift, not found in all creative writers, of being able self-consciously, when outside his creative reveries, to describe and half enact what it felt like when he was in one fully and presumably unself-consciously, and when outside to tell his conscious motives and aims when using such material in his fiction. We find this ability and such passages in Henry James's notebooks. In her also posthumously published autobiography, edited by a trusted relative, Margaret Oliphant marvels at Trollope's objectified descriptions as astonishing and strange, and says while as a fellow novelist and having read his other writing, it seems to her that these self-explanations are quite sincere, she cannot and is not going to perform and describe the like about herself, since they make her uncomfortable, since she thinks they are presented to please a contemporary, overly self-conscious and rationalizing era. The common complaint about Trollope's life writing is he neglects to give us, to quote him at the close of his book, a record of my inner life, or omits, skips over, or worse, gets details of his story wrong, maybe falsifies them. I have wondered what could be going on in readers' minds as they read his life as he chooses to tell it himself, what they are expecting to learn or feel justified in demanding as if Trollope were cheating them. Yes, he tells us little about his wife, only a specific set of traits and life experiences of one of his sons, Fred, who figures directly in Trollope's fiction, of one of his liaisons, if we can call it that, or friendships with a woman, only that it occurred, and that since he loved her for some 15 of his later years more than any other person outside of his family, he must at least speak of her, or he would be writing falsely, or be obfuscating references to experiences that mattered dearly to him and are therefore fundamental to the matter of his fiction. He does not tell us of other private things, actual memoirs about his many travel experiences, since, as he suggests, these are experiences he deems not germane, because he's not writing of himself as an ordinary or usual man. For him to tell of those things would be to tell what you could hear from anyone. He's writing of himself as a professional novelist. The story of his life that matters, why he's writing this text, is how he came to invent and then write fiction, why he forms it in the way he does, stories, because, as he painstakingly shows us, this is in his society the way one goes about being professional, practicing uh, his gifts or education or talents in such a way as to get paid, and over time build what is called a career or recognized reputation, which means for the novelist getting paid for providing acceptable matter. Trollope calls this matter his wares to commercial publishers, and then he tells how this process affected him and further influenced his writing as he went along. He admits on chapter 1, page 1. To convey all this necessitates going through many passages of his life chronologically to provide for readers a recognized and intelligible form. Kincaid thinks Trollope follows the outline of Dickens's David Copperfield, a novel we might today call autofiction. The trajectory of boyhood wretchedness into successful manhood is similar, but much of the rest is quite different. For example, as is typical of novels, a love story is central to David Copperfield. and Dickens presents the book to be read as a novel, a fiction. While no love story is central to Trollope's book, as it seems no love story was central to his writing gifts or career. Trollope intends us to take his book not as a novel, but as true as a fallible human being can be. Quote, who can endure to own the doing of a mean thing? Also, page 1. He dares tell us of matters others would not. How his brother whipped him, how he was left without enough money in school, his humiliations, in such a way, self-deprecatingly, as not to incur hostile reactions, with Rousseau as his example of why there are limits to what you can say in this almost impossible to do genre. There is a reason for his earnest insistence he is telling the truth as far as he can remember without doing research. He mentions this. I could write a paper just on the development of autobiography and biography in 19th century Eurocentric and Anglocentric writing. Many have, and I recommend A.O.J. Cockshut's two studies of English 19th century biography and autobiography especially. Here I have only time to suggest that Trollope wrote his book in order to preclude happening to him what he saw happening to other artists or famous people. I infer this from where he describes Forster's biography of Dickens as more popular than David Copperfield. The biographer's subjects, people like him, had imposed on them the biographer's or someone else's interpretation or assumptions and choices of what to tell, and he saw that they had told the life story, whether deliberately or not, in such a way as to invite many readers to talk and write about the story according to their own prejudices, and this he did not want. He writes of his awareness he is in danger of becoming guilty of this, as he sees it, in his own biography of Thackeray, a fault he did not escape from when it came to talking of Thackeray as a paid writer with obligations. I measure or understand success the way Trollope does. That is, you look at where someone starts out. What were the many obstacles and enemies of promise that lie in his way, which he tells us about in the first searing chapters of his book. He is demonstrating to us he was remarkably successful, however modest his tone. And here he succeeded too. He has until now forestalled other or different kinds of stories being told about him, or any of his close friends and family members. Some, like John Sutherland and R.H. Super, more tirelessly than Sutherland, labor to substitute a less admirable or more balanced, that's Super's word, story than Trollope's, based on discrepancies they find between his text, those of others, and the institutional documents. Trollope's brother, Lord Victoria Glendinning, is careful to remind us, was his mother's favorite, the oldest male, and sent to university. Trollope was number 4, not a good number in a society where inheritance is still ruled by primogeniture. Thomas said Anthony painted their childhoods as far too black. So we're supposed to remember why he has a more optimistic view than Trollope. But it is Trollope's burning words about these past events, of passing remarks thrown at him, and how they led what happened to his heroes in his books, and what he did in life. For example, he ran for Parliament, that we remember, and are persuaded to accept as important, real, and which we remember when we come, for example, to read his stories of his various heroes, say running for parliamentary office. I challenge anyone here to recite from memory some substitute description by one of Trollope's more recent biographers for Trollope's own. For example, I can remember well the keenness of my anguish when I was treated as though I were unfit for any useful work. Or, all that was 50 years ago. It burns me now as though it were yesterday. But every one of us, I dare say, carries about in some dim recess of our memories his or her favorite haunting words from Trollope's autobiography. I think the various disputed stories matter less than first distinguishing how an autobiography differs from a novel, in order that we may come to Trollope's text with appropriate expectations as we go through what we find in the first half of panel of his book about himself as a successful professional novelist when a boy and young man. The traditional format, now it is traditional, it was made so in the 19th and early 20th century, is the same as a novel. Both are prose narratives which tell a story. It's the way in which these two kinds of text link up to people and things of all sorts outside the book that makes novels and love writing so different. The novelist aims to reveal imagined characters through the action of the story, his meditations and use of language. All that we can know of this particular story and its characters is contained in the novel. Trollope, as novelist, can invent all sorts of things about Mr. Harding in those novels of Barsage's series in which he appears or is described. Even if, through Mr. Harding's character, Trollope refers to real events and people outside the book. Mr. Harding is not to be identified with these real people or limited by what really happened to them. Similarly, there's no hidden Mr. Harding who goes and does things we don't know about. I refer, of course, to Edmund Wilson's famous question put to Shakespeare's Macbeth, how many children had Lady Macbeth? And its implied answer, this is not a legitimate question to ask. From the Barsager novels, I know all there is to know about Mr. Harding, and know them better than I can ever know Anthony Trollope the man, either by reading about his life in his letters or his autobiographies or a biography or elsewhere. My point is an autobiographer is not writing about imagined characters, but he aims to explain himself as a real individual, to explore how he became what he is. The autobiographer has a life outside the book, unlike Mr. Harding, say, directly connected to the story in it, but not all of that life is relevant. Much of it will not help him to tell the truth about himself as he sees, or wants us to grasp it through a book, which, like a novel, can begin and end where the autobiographer chooses. Readers understand they're not to ask about what Mr. Harding is doing while the narrator takes us to another part of the novel in question. In The Warden, we do not worry whether Mr. Harding has gone to retrain himself for another position, has other children, has a mistress we don't know about. We do not accuse him, as many have Trollope in the autobiography, of deliberately making mistakes, of not telling us everything about his sex life and finances, of winning a prize he forgot about. Equally, in an autobiography, we should not complain about what Trollope doesn't tell us about his life off stage, or add details in order to change the emphasis of what Trollope does tell us. That substitutes our version of his life for his version. We read both genres to encounter a subjective vision that we identify as our storyteller or friend, the author. The living truths both autobiographies and novels communicate are, and this is Trollope's, the condition of mind and intelligence of the author of the particular book. Trollope writes his autobiography from the same self-conscious, skeptical standpoint that in his novels will not permit him or us to forget we are reading a fictional story and he is our storyteller. It may be asked whether Anthony Trollope the man has the right to keep secrets from us in his autobiography. My answer is a partial yes. Since the middle-aged Anthony Trollope knew he loved Kate Field, later editors of an autobiography have revealed who she was, and his love for her revealed an important aspect of his life, history, and character as he saw it and wanted us to see it. In his book, he feels he must tell us at least that such a woman existed and what she meant to him, and he does. On the other hand, this American woman and other real living people Trollope cares about might be hurt by his telling us any more about them. Trollope, his wife, and sons, and Kate Field are not characters in a book. They have complicated existences outside the book and could be damaged by details about them which others could use in ways impossible to foresee. Trollope therefore explicitly tells us that he is withholding what he thinks would be a betrayal of himself and these people, were he to specify. So, for example, it's significant for understanding the way we live now, and therefore justified, that Mark Greene, among others, demonstrates, probably or persuasively accurately, that Lady Carberry is, let's admit, an ambiguous, if not hostile depiction of Trollope's mother, Fanny Trollope. I add, Lady Carberry's self-destructive and enabling devotion to her son, Sir Felix Carberry, may reflect how Trollope felt about his mother's devotion to his older brother. I suggest Trollope's depiction of Mrs. Neverbend in the Fixed Period, and perhaps Mrs. Badgett, an old, no longer attractive housekeeper for Mr. Whittlestaff in An Old Man's Love, might reflect some of the ways Trollope may have, yes, unkindly seen his wife Rose when she was older late in life. She is homely in the one small photo we have, and he refers to her half comically as an awkward laboring biped in petticoats, climbing the hills by his side. I think I'm not sure of this. It was Julian Hawthorne, Nathaniel's son, who said somewhere, I couldn't find it, that Trollope's books were his wife. Mrs. Badgett is compared disparagingly to the lovely young girl whom Mr. Whittlestaff lusts after and wants to marry, and whom she treats slightly derisively. But Trollope is not obliged to tell us any of this, if indeed he admitted it to himself, if indeed it has any truth. He is not offering us a novel with a novel's pleasures, but life writing, justified by whom he has become of his specific purposes in mind. So Trollope's use of his preternaturally lucid explanations of how his imaginative process worked are easy to misunderstand, because they're part of a demonstration in the book that the writer is a hard-working worker in a legitimate profession. It's a profession, like a visual artist, a musician, or even a scientist. The term natural philosopher was first dropped in the 18th century, or shoemaker, which is comical, for whom there was no recognized and had no fixed certificate to vouch for your merit or capabilities. Trollope tells us his worldly success did not originate in university training or academic knowledge, but his intensely active fantasy life. In this diptych's opening chapters, he chooses to tell us of his mortifications and unmanly failures in the schools he went to where he felt like an outcast because these relate to his novels. What did an academic prize matter? He was trained in Latin by bodily punishment, for early manhood training put into post office bureaucracy. He tells us more than once that once removed from the environment where he was shamed by his father's crazed dramatic behavior, which he tells us of, a ruined house, and his mother's flight from her husband, with a book illustrator with all her children in tow, where he no longer faced in his Lacanian mind people's disappointment in him, where no one harassed him for money, do be punctual, or wished he was not there. There had clung to me a feeling that I had been looked upon always as an evil, an encumbrance, a useless thing, as a creature of whom those connected with him had to be ashamed. That is to say, removed to Ireland, where he was not pre-placed, where he was given an occupation that he could excel in, his boy and young manhood depression lifted. It seemed so strange to be in a country where there was not an individual whom I had ever spoken to or ever seen. I never heard a word of censure, nor had many months passed before I found my services were valued. Okay, he loved letters because through caring for them, he rose in life. Letters became precious objects entrusted to his care, each and every one of which should arrive unscathed and in a timely fashion to where or to whom it was directed. He understood others saw what he was doing differently. Not infrequently, the angelic nature of my mission was imperfectly understood. The latter part of the first half of the diptych begins his tale of how he worked, traveled, was accepted for responsible diplomatic jobs, even quit the beloved job, losing his right to pension in old age because he became indignant at being passed over for promotion. That's chapter 8 and chapter 15. The second half of his book begins after chapter 11 at chapter 12, after he delineates the special psychological anguishes and possible deep pleasures of a literary career, its nature, if you would. In chapter 12, we move into the present, and he, anticipating E.M. Forster, defines what a novel is, tells us how he sees the art of writing, and goes on to explain and evaluate the work of his fellow novelist. Remember, he intended this to be published posthumously, so he could do that. The matter of the second half is a direct development of the first and takes the same angle. This is a portrait of him as a novelist. He again refuses mystification at every point. He finds absurd the belief he discerns people wish to hold about writers, that they produce what they know what the reader knows he can't, and what the reader knows he can't, and whose works they are very suspicious about. Because the writer is overcome by an urge or inspiration, as if this kind of work needs some extraordinary excuse. No one could live like that or produce great works. His friends and colleagues all like him. People like his readers in many ways. Trollope concentrates on writers who held prestigious jobs beyond writing, were diplomats and got commissions, who were responsible members of society with families, spouses, and children. So his valued friends are John Everett Millais, G. H. Lewes, even though he was an atheist, and other editors and writers he worked with, and the much respected William Makepeace Thackeray, chapters 10 and 11. He presents his mother's work in the same light, a very hard-working woman holding her family together in sickness and health, and then enjoying her life and work in Italy with her eldest son. I doubt we today regard Trollope's descriptions of his life, or his mother's in her older age, as people holding down more than one job, working far more than 40 hours a week, as abnormal. In the earlier and mid-20th century, modern critics regarded Trollope's worksheets and assertions that he counted every word and tallied the data against the clock as a publicly acceptable way of describing a mania. For example, Walter Kendrick in his The Novel Machine. Susan Humphreys, writes of Trollope as an isolated, wounded, abnormal personality, observed with an essentially absurd pursuit. I don't intend to single her out, but assert this was, and is perhaps among some who haven't thought about what a professional writing career demands, still a common misapprehension. In fact, Trollope's days and nights resemble those of the professional American writer and editor of The Atlantic, for a while a diplomat in Italy, who wrote a campaign biography of Lincoln, who also wrote 47 novels, travel books, essays, short stories, was the central support of his family, even a socialist with a nervous breakdown. But no one has thought William Dean Howells mad or obsessed with an absurd pursuit. Howells was a professional worker. He was not as candid about himself or his art as Anthony Trollope can be in his fiction, as well as nonfiction. As far as I can tell, I don't know that much about Howells. He felt no need to preclude someone else writing his life. He did not worry he had become a celebrity, as Trollope worries about in the cases of Dickens and Thackeray, saying of the wide popularity of Forster's biography, there is no withstanding such testimony as this. Of course, what can one say if a reader is impervious to argument, is bored, or declares openly he or she is uninterested in the details of working life of a writer? I can't see why she or he is not told much more about Trollope and Kate Field, another working professional writer, or possibly other women. Feels satisfied by the depictions of a lonely boy, loner, identifies with the ignored child, the depressed young man living across the street from a factory, and then is dissatisfied and irritated at the later life to be told the actual working life of a novelist and editor, about how to write the politics of a novel, served up with the fundamentals of storytelling, Trollope's own literary criticism of his own novels, and then Trollope's earning power. Can you say to them, what is they are demanding is none of their business? The matter begins in chapter 9, this matter, and carries on throughout the book. I've been asked by publishers and editors, could you shorten or skip the meticulous microanalysis, especially in film studies, because readers grow restless? I feel I know so much more about Trollope from these latter chapters of what I want to know and would miss not knowing. And I wish Margaret Oliphant and many another writer whose writing I read a lot of could have brought herself to talk of her books and career as Trollope does in a coherent autobiography. I'll end with how I believe we should read Trollope's judgments and criticism of his own novels in these somewhat controversial chapters of his book. It is these many readers turn to as if to an oracle who should know who should know when they want to defend their feelings about this or that controversial character. It's what critics turn to and use in their arguments. Lily Dale will have to stand for one case in point of all. Trollope treats Lily roughly, saying he doubts so many readers would have written him letters concerning her fate if he had married her to Johnny Eames. He says somewhat irritatedly that what endears her to these people is she could not get over her troubles. And his comment, she is something of a female prig, is his reply to them. Let me suggest that here and elsewhere his remarks are often addressed to readers. Our reactions to anticipated misreadings are often defensive and not candid. Bill Overton's useful distinction between an official Trollope and an unofficial Trollope will help us here. The unofficial Trollope is the brilliant, highly articulate consciousness that delves with unconventional feelings and thoughts in his novels when deep in his creative reveries. The official Trollope is the conventional moralist, also found inside the novels and in the nonfiction. As our moralizing and satirical narrator who will suddenly produce a wholly other, unexpected perspective, as when he suddenly argues that Marie Melmotte, in The Way We Live Now, was wrong to defy her father, to try to keep his money over a technicality the father had signed it over to her. If Trollope has harrowed us with dramatizing suggestively a brutal beating of her by her father in the context of a callous and indifferent upbringing and the destruction of her biological mother. In the autobiography, this official Trollope sometimes takes on a tone totally out of whack with everything else he has said about a particular situation or character. In these passages, he reminds me of what people who met him in life said of him, quick and abrasive in reply, of what N. John Hall explained as Trollope's carapace at dinner tables. I turn to Gaston Bachelard in his books on reverie, and Proust in many places. The writer of subjective and epistolary prose at full length, especially the sort where the character wears his heart or her heart on a sleeve, is the product of our dreaming self, who is quite different from the self or mask we manifest in society, in drawing rooms and public places. It's telling how few scenes in bedrooms Trollope writes, how rare is the mention of any character's dream. To paraphrase Proust, Trollope waited for such solitudes, or when pressed for time on a train in a ship's cabin, to go back to those numbered papers and disclose, sometimes as a female character, the real me, the one for whom Trollope tells us in this book he lived, Trollope as novelist.